Freedom marches. Now, something that I constantly mention to you about these is they do play a significant role in the struggle for civil rights. The one you'll all remember is obviously the March on Washington, which I'll come to a little bit later, but remember to mention that those are the freedom marches that went on as well. Freedom marches were completely and utterly set up by Martin Luther King. He was a real believer in these being able to make progress. The SNCC were certainly involved in these, just like they were with the freedom rides and also with the sit-ins. But it's important to remember that lots of people who were members of the NAACP were, people who were members of CORE were, and also lots and lots of white sympathisers. The reason why Martin Luther King's freedom marches were truly so successful was because they were integrated. And I want you to remember that. Think about what we said about the March on Washington in class. Think about the things like Bloody Sunday in Selma. All of these things were because there were integrated marches in the end. Then this showed that there was unity between blacks and whites in America. So people all over America did freedom marches. Any opportunity they got, they would march for jobs and freedom. And this is really what they were marching for on the March on Washington. So, the March on Washington is obviously a focal freedom march because in 1963, Martin Luther King thought it had got to a point in the civil rights movement where there needed to be more publicity and also a massive integrated march to show that progress really could be made. So, 250,000 people from all over America got on buses, planes, trains, whatever would take them to Washington DC to see and do the I Have a Dream speech. Now obviously not everybody could afford to go, and we know that a lot of black African Americans were poorly paid and some of them may have had to work. So what happened was they did freedom marches actually in their towns, okay, so they actually rose up and did that to show that they were in solidarity with what was happening in Washington at the time. And also people who were black Africans in other places of the world, they marched to US embassies because again they wanted to show the solidarity with the people at home. So the March on Washington is absolutely iconic, and the I Have a Dream speech was voted the most influential speech of the 20th century. This is what we're talking about here. This is something that needs to be stressed when you do it in an exam question. So an integrated march was at Washington DC. And it was also televised to millions and millions of people. You can imagine JFK was slightly concerned in August 1963 how this March on Washington would go, because he thought there could be some sort of riot with all the blacks and whites together, but actually was massively impressed with the things that Martin Luther King said. You won't get a question specifically on everything that it says on the I Have a Dream speech, but the key thing is he talked about God wanting everybody to be equal, which is absolutely fundamental to it. Also, he talked about people being judged by the content of the character, not the colour of their skin. And this was something that was groundbreaking because we know that for centuries in America that had not always been the case. And he wanted blacks and whites to be equal. He talked about equality, and that's important. He wasn't just talking about black progress, he was also talking about that alongside the ones for white progress as well, that they should be doing this together. So, the March on Washington was a great success, so it does play a major role in the civil rights movement alongside many other things. After the march, he got to meet JFK, which was obviously groundbreaking. This is very important because they discussed how they could move things forward. And certainly this is where they first discussed about ending segregation. And JFK was true to his word. He went on television, talked about things like segregation should be ended because we can't go on like that as a country, and he agreed that eventually he would pass a bill that ended segregation altogether. And even though he was assassinated, Johnson kept Kennedy's word. So remember, the March on Washington is about what happens at Washington, but it's also about the other freedom marches and things that were done to try and get progress.
The The long-anticipated Freedom March from Selma to Alabama's capital of Montgomery finally gets underway as Dr. Martin Luther King addresses the crowd at the starting point. Twice before, the marchers had been turned back by state troopers. Now they march under a federal court order and with the protection of federalized National Guard units and regular troops, a total of nearly 3,000 men. For the first day, there are 3,200 marchers in line. Half of the four-lane Highway 80 is closed to traffic. Later, where it becomes 2 lanes, the marchers had been ordered by the court to reduce their number to 300, a measure designed for their safety. There are a few isolated flare-ups between whites and Negroes, but otherwise the demonstration is peaceful. The first day, the marchers tramp a little over 7 miles. Those who have been assigned to complete the 54-mile walk hope to present a petition to Governor George Wallace. The first night is spent in a field near New Sister Springs Baptist Church, their host a Negro farmer. While 2,900 of the marchers return to Selma, the rest resume their long trek. Organizers hope their ranks will be swelled once again when the nucleus arrives in Montgomery. The Freedom March has been an historical venture in nonviolent protest.